Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today, I'm trying something extremely ambitious. This is the most ambitious meetup I have done. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, okay? What I'm doing is that I'm looking at two of my favorite thinkers, Carl Jung and John Boyd. And what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to take a method of thinking from each of them, and I'm using those methods. The method from John Boyd is called destruction and creation. I've done a full meetup on this. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and watch that video first, which I'm going to link in the links, in the description of this meetup. So that is one method of destruction and creation. It's a way of continuously updating your ideas in order to handle and live well in a changing world and to shape a changing world and be shaped by it. That's what the purpose of that method is. The second method I'm using is from Carl Jung. And that is a method of visualization, of actually putting all your deepest ideas in a single diagram and working on it. You know, he calls it a mandala, but it's a very deep way of thinking. So I'm bringing both those methods. I'm using both those methods, and I want you to use both those methods. That's why you need pen and a paper. If you came in late, make sure you have a pen and a paper and at least 10 sheets of paper. All right. So those are the two methods. So what I'm doing fundamentally is I'm using the method of destruction and creation from John Boyd on the ideas of Carl Jung and John Boyd. And then what I'm doing is that I'm taking the ideas apart, and then I'm putting all the ideas together, okay, both of John Boyd and of Carl Jung. Now, first question is, why do this? Okay. What happens is that these ideas are living things. Even for a single person, like let's take Carl Jung. Okay, the core idea that we are looking at is his psychological functions. But he has other very deep ideas. And most people who think about psychological functions actually do not take into account those ideas. Like, for example, he has the idea of self, which is his core idea, self and individuation. And people look at psychological functions as separate from these ideas. So what we are going to do is that we are going to take psychological functions and we are going to integrate it with his idea of self and individuation. Similarly, for John Boyd, people get focused on the OODA loop, and they focus on going through the loop fast. But they lose his core points that he has made in destruction and creation. One is, what is the purpose of all of this? And he calls the purpose, the goal, as increasing your capacity for independent action. So how do you relate OODA loop to that core idea? Also, there is the idea of just entropy, that there is entropy all around. And how does OODA loop connect with that? So what I'm doing is that I'm connecting the idea of psychological function of Carl Jung with his other ideas like self and individuation. And I'm connecting John Boyd's idea of OODA loop with his idea of the goal and entropy. So this is what I'm doing within each of these. But I'm doing more than that. I mean, the basic idea, the method of John Boyd is that you take apart ideas from multiple fields. So here we are taking two fields, Carl Jung's ideas and John Boyd's ideas. And then you put them together as one whole, okay? So we are not just going to put together ideas of Carl Jung in a different way, but we are going to actually take apart both these people's ideas and then put them all together. Now, why do this? Why do this for these two people? And why is it particularly useful? I think that each of them have a tremendous strength. John Boyd is amazing at dealing with the external world, of dealing with fast changing external world. What do you need to do? It is action oriented approach to life. Jung's, and it is focused more on external world and uses internal world as a way of showing how you deal with the external world, because you do need to know quite a bit about the internal world in order to deal well with the external world. But the focus, his focus, John Boyd's focus, is on acting well in the external world. Carl Jung's focus is the other way around. He's fascinated with the internal world and lovingly describes the internal world, everything that is going on inside. He does do things with the external world, but as a side thing. That's not his focus. Also, John Boyd's view is action-oriented view. It's a dynamic view. It is purpose. It's a very strongly purpose-driven view of the world. Carl Jung's view is a much more kind of a view of a sage, view of, he's all about be. He's saying, who are you? And John Boyd is saying, what will you do? So it is the difference between being and becoming. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to leverage both of them. You need both of them. You need to have a grasp of who you are internally. And you need to have a grasp of what you're doing externally. You need both of them. Each of these people have things to say about both, but their strengths and their emphasis is different. So what we are doing is by bringing together their ideas, we're trying to relate the action in the external world with the richness of the internal world. Okay, that's what we are trying to do. All right. And again, it's going to be a lot of work. So unless you're willing to do the exercises and go through and do the interaction, it's not worth it. I would recommend just go, you should watch the YouTube video. You can pause it and go through it in detail. Now, I'm going to hold everybody to a very high standard, okay? And I have a very powerful mechanism that I'm putting. This is the third tool that we are using, okay? This I've learned from Julian Jaynes. And when you compare it to these other two tools of destruction and creation and visualization, this tool of pen and paper is a match for them. Probably it's the greatest of the three, okay? And I want you to have it, and I want you to work with me on that, okay? So first thing is that whenever I put up a diagram, please draw the diagram on your own, okay? You can write and then write whatever observations you're making. I'm deliberately not putting words there. I want you to put the words in the diagram so you can capture it yourself, okay? I want you to speak. I want this to be interactive. But what I suggest is that before you speak, write down. You don't need to write the whole sentences, but write down the bullet points, what you want to say, okay? Hold yourself to the high standard. Look at what you have written down, the bullet points of what you're planning to say, review it and say it based on that. So let's use that standard. I trust you fully. That your own review of it is going to make each minute count, okay? Next thing is that focus on asking questions. Okay, this is difficult enough to try to understand ideas of these two giants, try to see what we are doing about how we are taking them apart, how we are putting them together. It's difficult enough. So don't bring in other people's ideas. any genuine question you have yourself is welcome. Questions are always welcome. So focus on asking questions, not on making statements. Okay, it's too difficult to integrate everything. We'll have plenty of time to do that. Currently, just focused on understanding what is being said and ask questions about that. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want, okay? All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start sharing a screen here. There are only 4 slides. And after each of the slides, I'm going to pause for questions, okay? So feel free to ask questions. Again, the rules are the same. Put exclamation mark in chat when you want to speak, when you want to ask a question, or raise your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, you can disagree with anything, but do so courteously. So most important point today is the briefness, okay? I want you to be brief. Yes, so you have to have a pen and a paper, and I will show you what needs to be written down in a minute. So first, all right, so let me share the screen. Joe, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. All right, so this is where we start. What is this? Okay, so this is the most profound principle here. Okay, so what you're drawing is there is a ring that you're drawing. That is basically your life. Okay, that is your life, the ring. The core white circle is your purpose. And there is chaos. The gray is chaos or entropy. There is entropy outside of the external life that is impinging continuously on your life. And there is entropy between your life and your purpose. So there are 2 levels of entropy. So that is the diagram, okay? Now let me put it in terms of Carl Jung first, and then John Boyd first. So in terms of Carl Jung, all the psychological functions that you have that you're operating are all in that ring over there. And what your goal is to be yourself. It's the process of individuation. So imagine that you're trying to expand that white, and white kind of combines all of these colors, and you're trying to contract the circle more and more towards the white. So to become one, that is the goal towards which all of the individual things that you're doing is moving towards. Okay. Let's look at it from the Boyd's perspective. Okay. From Boyd's perspective, that ring is the OODA loop. That's what you're doing all the time. The purpose of it is to increase your capacity for independent action, which is the center. Your OODA loop is being impinged by all kinds of external factors. In war, it's the enemy and everything that is going around. In life, there is all kinds of stuff that is going around that is impinging your life. There is also the entropy between your life and your purpose. You do not have it perfect. You're doing many things habitually which are not in line with your life's purpose. So there is entropy at both sides. So it's very simple concepts. There are just 3 things. There is your life, which can have multiple elements. We're not going into the elements of it yet. And that's the ring. There is entropy, there is external entropy, and there is internal entropy. And then there is the core purpose. Okay. So this is my first point that I wanted to make. Now, folks, you're welcome to ask questions at this level. I'm going to stop sharing. So firstly, Has everybody drawn this on their own paper? Okay, just I'm going to change the view to gallery view. I want to make sure that some people just raise your hand if you have drawn this. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, wonderful. So now, folks, questions. Any questions about this? You can go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have questions. Stephen is first. Stephen followed by AM. Again, folks, keep your questions very brief. Write down your questions, not fully, but at least maybe in few words or bullet points, and make sure that that's good, you know, that you formulated it well, and then you can say it very briefly. Dave, is entropy same as chaos? Yes, absolutely. Chaos is another way of looking at entropy. Stephen, followed by AM, followed by Ahmed and Joe. Stephen, what's your question?
So I understand that John Boyd talks of entropy, but in these diagrams, what's the difference in the ring between Carl Jung and John Boyd that you said? Could you repeat that?
It was a different way of formulating it. So entropy is a concept that John Boyd uses a lot. Carl Jung doesn't, for him, that's not a major concept. But what he says, I mean, the way in which Carl Jung, that's an excellent question. So let me bring up this screen again. So the way in which, and what I'm doing is that I'm deliberately saying few things to begin with, and then I'm going to keep adding things as people keep raising questions. So the way in which Carl Jung thinks about it is that we are creatures of habit. We, both in terms of our actions, emotions, thoughts, we get hung up on doing certain things. So we are going along this life. Our self is much larger than life, and we lose track of that. So if we lose track of that center, and we get impacted by things around us, and we move and respond to that. So it is that chaos of ours responding to other people, ours creating habits which are not really capturing the whole of ourselves. That's the way in which Carl Jung would think about it. AM, what's your question?
So the chaos that is the entropy, is that like a distraction that is causing you to go away from the purpose?
Wonderful, excellent question. So chaos is metaphysical. There is, I mean, this is just second law of thermodynamics. So even when you have really, really paid attention and tried to perfect what we are doing, as soon as you set that in motion, it begins to decay. So there is a chaotic element that is involved in every system. So there is chaos in multiple ways. There is a chaos in external things impinging on you. And secondly, it is inability of keeping whatever you have designed going towards your function all the time. So it's, if you think of it in terms of form and function, even if you spend a lot of time perfecting a form that actually does very well at capturing the functions, as soon as the form is created, it begins to go away from the function that is needed. And one of the results of it is distraction, because you start paying attention to things that is other than your purpose in the process. Next up is Ahmed, Joe, and Hugo. Ahmed.
Thank you, Shrikant. I do have a lot of questions, but I'll be brief and I'll save most of them for later. I was going to ask first, just
what's your best question?
My best question. Okay. How do we overcome the entropy, and is that entropy natural? Does Jung, did he say anything about this? Or is it something that we allow ourselves to develop, like distraction stuff as we grow? And that would be my biggest question, my best
Excellent,
question.
excellent, excellent. So let me just take that. There'll be plenty of time for questions, and I'm going to be developing this step by step. So you can maybe at another time you'll be able to bring in your other questions. So entropy actually exists. So it is just a property of the universe, and the challenge of life is to achieve order in midst of this chaos. So it is all about, life is all about, life, even at a biological level, is all about achieving local order in the midst of increasing chaos of the whole system. And that's what the challenge of life is. And that's what the challenge of conscious life is, of kind of keeping, identifying your purpose and keeping to it. And both, all kinds of things outside of you as well as inside of you will tend to go towards entropy. And you have to continuously do a process. John Boyd calls it destruction and creation, of continuously working on your ideas in order to take them apart, in the process of which you increase the entropy, but then putting it back together in a better way, which actually increases order or decreases entropy at a local level. And you're doing this process continuously, and that is metaphysical. And that's kind of part of nature. Next up is going to be Joe and Hugo. Joe.
I'm trying to pick my best question. I have like 3 myself, but I would guess I'm going to ask a basic one first. How would you distinguish between the idea of a purpose and the principles that you would manage your circle by, and the idea and how that factors in with design?
Okay, excellent question. So what we are trying to do in the center is mostly purpose. And any kind of principle, large principle that achieves the purpose would be something. Basically, only the things which are universal go into the circle. So universal principles that you can apply to everything will go into the circle. So over time, that circle will have a structure. Purpose will be at its center, and the principles by which you're achieving the purpose would be around them. And all of that would be in the center. It is in the center because it applies to everything that you do. Excellent question. Thank you. Next up is Hugo.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. My question is, could you please go over the difference between the internal entropy and the external one?
Okay, that's an excellent question. External entropy means that you're living, right? You're living your life, and all kinds of things that can happen to you. Like COVID is an example. People acting in a certain way, that's an example. So that's external part of entropy. There is an internal part of entropy. You might have a goal, and then you're doing many things. And those are not necessarily adding up. Those are actually many times conflicting with each other and producing kind of internal entropy. So it is when your actions or what you're doing in your life doesn't lead to the purpose. So it is that mismatch between your life and your purpose is what I'm calling the internal entropy. Next up is Katie. What's your question?
Hey, yes, sorry. So I was just, so I'm not that familiar with Boyd, but I am pretty familiar with Jung, and I was just wondering if this concept is related to the religious philosophical concept of order out of chaos.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is about that order and chaos that Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. And this is all about that. And we are going to go into that in great amount of detail. Wonderful. Next up is Madeline, followed by Mike. Madeline. Madeline, you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, I am. I'm more familiar with the concept of entropy just as a physics idea, which is the general everything running down a gradient to reach the exact same level of energy. My understanding of Boyd is that that's the way he was using it basically in this dialectical thing. And yet it seems that in the discussion, if you could clarify between that and what we're talking about in terms of chaos like COVID-19.
Okay, that's a very good question. See, entropy is a very general idea. Its idea comes from physics. When a living being faces entropy, that's a different thing. So when the religious idea of order versus chaos, it is from the perspective of a living being, something that is disturbing what it needs to do in order to continue life. So it is one of the consequences of chaos. I brought in COVID-19 as an example of something that comes out of the blue that you did not expect, that radically changes your external context so that you'd have to readjust a lot of things to be able to operate as well as before. So that is one example of that. Things can happen outside, which are completely outside your control, that can vary things dramatically. And that's something that you have to have a method of dealing with that. And that's what John Boyd's ideas are about. Mike, Joe, and Hugo. Mike, what's your question? 2 sentences or 3 sentences, please.
I'm not sure that my question is probably half a statement, half a question.
No, just take. I'll take the question half of the statement.
Okay. Well, and I don't. The universe is going to have to answer it because I can't see an answer, so I don't expect you to give me an answer either. But there's 2 things. This is. I don't see a difference between these 2 approaches, and I'll add the 3rd approach is the Bayesian thing that
look. The thing is that we are not going to go into other things. I will do that at some point. There are many, and I do that naturally. I have ideas about combining this with lots of other things, but I don't. It is difficult enough, Mike, for me to take these 2 people and put it together.
Okay, well, what I want to do, and I'm not quite sure how. Same problem in the Bayesian one, is that you don't have single units to talk about. You have n. 10,
what's your question,
units.
Mike? Rule today is the rule is brief. You have to be brief, please.
Okay, well, to wrap it up. Chaos is not a measure of disorder. It's as Shannon used entropy as a measure of information and order as to how you solve the problem.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is Joe, followed by Hugo. Joe.
So yeah, mine's going to be very brief. Is that if there are universals in the center, where are particulars? Is that in the outer ring?
Absolutely, they're okay. Outside. They're outside. I mean, the particulars about external things are outside that ring of your life, and then that ring itself is particulars about your life. Your individual thoughts, individual feelings, individual sensations, intuitions, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on the internal and external entropy. So is it something related to from the Stoic standpoint to things that you have control? That's internal entropy, and for the external one, things that you don't have control, or both you don't have control.
Okay, that's an excellent point. So external, clearly you don't have control over, and internal you have some control. I don't know up to what level. So for example, if you feel a certain emotion, you don't have control over that, but what you do about it has a control. So, but this question about kind of point of kind of locus of control is something that we will come to. Okay, but let me develop rest of the things, rest of the pieces, and then we will come back to stoicism. If I forget, could you could you bring this up again at a later stage after the slide 4? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, what's your question?
Oh,
Action to
I think
prevent.
we would just read it, and I think you answered it before about.
Okay, okay. If I've answered it, that's good. That's good. All right, folks. So this is the slide number 1. Now I'm going to go to slide number 2. All right. Okay. All right. So these are the colors of Jung. Okay, this is my summary of Jung's psychological functions. Let me first get a show of hands. Let me stop sharing. Folks, anybody who is not familiar with Jung's psychological functions, because I'm going to pretty much take it for granted at this point. If you're not familiar, I'm going to assume that everybody is familiar. But if there is, I'm not familiar. Okay, all right. So then I can't help you too much, okay? Because I'm going to just rush through everything, and I want to keep the discussion at as high a level as possible. So, but I'm assuming kind of a basic understanding of it, okay? All right, folks. So I'm going to start here. Okay. All right. Okay. This is, again, this is like my clearance sale on this. This is actually the idea of faculties. What are faculties? What faculties do you have? Do we human beings have? And what are the various classifications? And this is the best thing that I've used for a long time. Okay. But I'm seeing possibility of doing better than this. So this is my clearance sale of talking about this before I move on to the next level. I've been kind of looking back in history and forward in history, before Jung and after Jung. So I'm hoping to have a serious upgrade of this. But this is the best thing that I have right now. Okay. What is it? So these are the psychological functions. I look at it from the kind of evolutionary standpoint. The red, Jung calls feeling. It's more properly called valuing. It's like individual valuing and valuing in a social context. There are two kinds. That little black line is separating like internal and external versions of it. So there is kind of internal valuing, which is like the driver for action. And then there is external valuing. The next one is sensing. So there is external sensing that comes first. So this is external sensing, and then there is internal sensing. External sensing means you're standing, the feel of the wind on you. That's external. What you're hearing, what you're seeing. All of that is external sensing. Internal sensing is simply memory. Okay, so that is SI in Jungian terms. Then the yellow is the intuition. The difference between both these sensing and intuition are what Jung calls the perceiving functions. This is the way in which you take in information. It's like input functions. The other two are output functions. So how is the input function of intuition different from sensing? Intuition is focused on patterns. Sensing is focused on concretes. The first one over here is the external. Joe, you can see the mouse, right?
I can.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first one is NE, which is extroverted intuition. What it is doing is that it is a way of seeing possibilities, that you can do this, you can do that. So it's a way of kind of thinking about possibilities. The next one is introverted intuition. That is about coming up with visions. So extroverted intuition goes out like that. Whereas introverted intuition is something, give me just a second here. Okay, introverted intuition is something that brings things together. It's like forming a vision. What is it that is common to everything? So for example, this visualization is a tool of kind of bringing things together like that. So that is this part, this yellow part. The blue is thinking. The first one is introverted thinking, which is about being aggressive, bringing thinking to bear on your own ideas, looking for consistencies, contradictions on it, doing the critique of your own ideas internally. Extroverted thinking is a way of planning things out in life, or what do you need to do in order to get things done. Let me describe the FI and FE in a little bit more detail. So FI is your internal feeling, your individualized feeling that is driving your own values, whereas extroverted feeling is more responsive to other people and what you're trying to do with other people. Again, this blue and red together is like the output, is what he calls the judging functions. They are kind of the output of what will you do, kind of guiding either through thinking or through feeling. So those are the that's a quick look at Jungian functions. So I'm going to pause here. So just questions about both of these things. So just quick questions about Jungian functions. I cannot go into too much detail on this. This I'm expecting that most people are kind of familiar with it. Joe, go ahead.
All right, trying to take a systems thinking approach, is that how would the collective unconscious fit into this?
Okay, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. So it would be the ring itself is you, and then the collective unconscious would be kind of stuff which is outside, which would be like that's an excellent question. Okay, I'm thinking mostly in terms of self here. Everything that is kind of would be kind of at a social level would be in an external part. So it would be in the kind of that will lie outside, but you're trying to bring that inside.
Would that fit in Boyd's model in a way?
That's a very good. So the way in which Boyd looks at it is that he looks at it as kind of implicit context. So this is an implicit context and explicit. So let's put that, collective unconscious as the topic of, so we've got stoicism and collective unconscious as a topic to be discussed once we have put the whole thing together. But excellent question. Next up is Paul.
Yeah, I'm looking at the two diagrams and I'm trying to decide if you've created something where we always think of the little circle as sort of your principles and the core of your life, and the bigger circle as your life in a different kind of a way. And that's true of both this picture and the other picture?
Yes, exactly. Okay. The second picture is just the elaboration on the first picture. First picture was abstract and saying that there is your life. And now I'm saying that your life consists of these things that you do. And those are the specific things that you do. And the thing in the center is your purpose, something that unites those things, something towards which all of these things are trying to go. Excellent. Next up is Madeline. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes. Now that we're comparing the two diagrams, I'm wondering if Jung's process of individuation also involves the kind of pulling together or filling in of the area between the outer ring and the center. Is that the parallel you're drawing?
Yeah, I mean, see, all of these ideas, all of these questions are very profound questions, okay? I mean, Jung's idea of self, in one sense, is that it starts with that center, but it expands to include all of your life and then all of existence also, like including kind of the collective unconscious. So it's like, it's a way of kind of it's a way of focusing on the whole. So it's a way of kind of expanding, kind of individuation would be like expanding the circle so that it occupies, it becomes bigger and bigger, and your life becomes closer and closer to it, and at the best kind of it includes all of it, something like that. So it's like it's the self is the center, and individuation is the progress towards the center. And we will go into the details about the kind of movement towards the center. Moses, followed by Kevin. Moses, what's your question?
My question is, which of these two patterns or the model would be more accurate descriptive of reality? Like, which will give you best accurate description of how to be more correct and be more right in with your subjective, as well as how do you deal with the objective reality? So
perfect, excellent question. So which of them is a better method? So I would say each has its advantages. The first one, so let me bring up both of them, and let me answer the question this way. So firstly, this is very simple. This is simpler than this, okay? Here, so this is more philosophical. You are looking at your life as a whole. You're looking at your purpose as a whole. And you are also looking at things which are the context in which you are operating as a whole, and the mismatches between your life and your purpose as a whole. And so it's kind of you can think of it, it's a more abstracted view. This is more abstracted. This one is zooming in. So think of it as this is zooming in on your life. This is zooming out on your life. There are advantages of looking at life as a whole. At the same time, there are other advantages of zooming in and saying, okay, how well am I thinking? How well am I engaging my intuition? How well am I sensing? How well am I acting? That allows you to, it's a zoomed in perspective. And the other one is zoomed out perspective. And in different contexts, different ones are going to be more powerful. But great question. Kevin, what's your question?
My question about, can we use this so far describe one feeling, have a good day or bad day?
Okay, can you, so you're saying, can you use this to talk about?
Negative, positive, let's see, right? Now we have external describe, let's see, the value, doing anything, you know? How about the positive, negative side?
Okay, that's a good way of, so in terms of positive and negative, the positive direction here is towards the center, and the negative direction is away from the center. So what happens is that, let me go ahead and bring that up again. So let's go back. Okay, so positive direction is when you're moving towards your purpose, when your life is going closer to your purpose. Negative is when you're going away from the purpose. This can happen, this you can do yourself, or it can happen to you. You know, there can be something that is external in this external space that will take an element of your life and take it away from your purpose. You fall sick, you're going away from that. So there are all kinds of things. So that it's so positive and negative is towards the center and away from the center.
It's
all
like
right. Next one.
Inside focus, external drifter.
Yep. All right. So that's a very quick look at this one. Look at Carl Jung. Okay. So now we come to the main point. All right. So now this is a very odd way of drawing the OODA loop, but believe it or not, it is the OODA loop. Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is this actually probably is the most important diagram, because so far everything that I've said is only kind of repetition of what Carl Jung has said and John Boyd has said. This is actually something, I think I'm adding something to it. Okay. So first, I'm saying that if you look at the OODA loop, so now we're thinking about the OODA loop. Again, let me ask folks, how many of you are familiar with OODA loop? Who is not familiar with OODA loop? At least a little bit. If you're not familiar, let me know. And just, okay. You can go ahead and type, just type in the chat. All right, I'm going to assume that people are just at least have a basic familiarity, okay, with OODA loop. So let me just talk about the OODA loops for a second to make sure that we have everybody along. OODA loop, this is the idea of John Boyd. It is observe, orient, decide, and act. He came up with this idea as a way of fighting, as a way of responding to a changing world, both letting the world shape you and you shaping the world. You're going through these cycles. So it's a question of going through the cycles. So it's a circle. You're going round in cycle. And you're continuously observing new things. You're putting it together of saying, what does this mean? That is orientation. You're deciding what you need to do, and then you're acting. And then you're observing again and doing this action all over again. So first observation, when you study the OODA loop, is that of all those four things, is the orientation, which is the most complex thing. So here I'm giving about half of the circle to orientation. I think that is proper. Okay, that is the crucial thing. That is the hardest thing. That's the most complex thing. So this entire half, this part, is orientation. Okay. This is decision. This is deciding. This is planning. In Jung's terms, it is TE. It is extroverted thinking. Okay, this is deciding. I prefer the word planning to deciding because it's not about an individual decision, but it is planning of your action, and which is very close to what Jung talks about as a function of the extroverted thinking. Then there is action. Then you're taking the action of what you need to do over here. Now, let's come to the observe. So these two are relatively straightforward things to understand. You know, based on your understanding of what the situation is, based on your current orientation, you're deciding what to do or planning what to do. And then you are executing on the action. Now, observe on one hand seems very simple, but it is not, both in Carl Jung's theory and in John Boyd's theory. Because it is really not just that you're seeing things. You're actually seeing, you're trying to evaluate, you're trying to figure out what the mismatches were of what you were expecting to happen and what actually happened. You have to be really open to what happened. And then there are two kinds of input that you're taking. You're taking both the physical surrounding, which is the SE, and you're looking at the morale of people. How is this action playing out in people around you? So you're observing, you're taking in things from there. And this is very difficult. You know, you actually have to be very honest with yourself in order to notice that something is wrong. And that's what is going to give you the best way of reorienting yourself. That's the starting point. Most people evade this. Like, to put it in William James' term, will is paying attention to difficult objects. So this entire observe cycle, you have to be willing to pay attention to difficult things. You have to face your fear. That's the way in which Jung, or you have to, in filth, it lies, he would say. So that is, you're willing to look at mismatches, willing to look at unpleasant things, things that reflect negatively on you. That is what this part is about. And it is both at the physical things and the input that other people are giving you. So that's why I have put it like this. Now, orientation, or I call it reorientation, because it's not just, that you're not, it's not about just holding on to your orientation. Orientation is like your view, your picture of what is going on in the world. So you're trying to reorient. So what are you doing in the reorientation? So you're looking at, you've taken in the input from here, both physical and social. Then you're remembering everything that you have in your memory, that is SI. You are looking at all kinds of possibilities that could be. You're trying to put them together as a vision. You're critiquing it yourself. So there is a loop going on between these, between the TI and NI, between TI and NE, between TI and SE. So there is a lot of action that is going on here. It's not just one way. There is a lot of back and forth going on. All of it is inside of you. You're actually simulating the world. You're saying, what is the world like? What do I think the world is like? And you're recreating the simulation based on the observation as a result of your action based on your previous plan. And you're using that reorientation to plan out the next stage. Okay. Let me bring in the concept of destruction and creation, but let me pause for a second here. And let me see if there are any questions. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for this. But is the unfolding the whole right side?
The whole left side. I don't know.
Or left?
How you're seeing it.
Yeah, the left.
Sorry, yeah. Three parts. Yeah, the three parts.
So the unfolding with interaction with the environment. That's that. Okay, so that's the other side, and then the orientation's the others.
Yeah. So okay, let me bring it up here. That's easier. So this is all reorientation,
okay,
which is happening. It's you're taking in the input from here, and you are reworking your simulation of what you think the world is like. So you're orienting yourself, you're reorienting yourself. And this is what you're doing outside. You're putting this out from here. Okay?
Okay.
Next up, let me just go back. Stop share. All right, next up is the white ray to the north and black ray to the south. Excellent question, Dave. I'm going to come to that as soon as I am done answering the questions about the basic loop. Moses, what's your question?
My question is about the reorientation side of the circle. Basically, if I can understand from right to left, it's right will be gathering of information and getting the feedback loop from the external world, and how we use extroverted thinking followed by feedback from morale of the group, blah, blah, blah. And when it comes to the reorientation side, if I'm correct, that when we go into that side, do we not sometimes delete, distort, and sometimes, color ourselves with biases that can actually cause certain inaccurate representation of the realities? And
Absolutely. Great point. I mean, and that's the reason why you do this, and then you take actions based on it. And then the most important thing is this observe part. That is where you're going to get evidence that there is a mismatch between that. So this is where you have to watch very carefully of saying, did I get this right or did I get this wrong? And this, being open to observation of what is actually true, regardless of what your previous orientation was, what happens is that people fall in love with their ideas. People fall in love with the conceptions that they have, concepts that they have, so that whenever there is evidence presenting itself against it, they do not look at it. There is confirmation bias. They are looking at only the part of evidence that matches with what they want to see. So absolutely. So the solution to the bias is actually acting out what you think and then watching the feedback very closely and correcting it. And I'm going to talk about that in detail in answer to Dave's question shortly. Next up is going to be Rourke, followed by Paul. Rourke. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, I have two muting methods anyways. I might just be unfamiliar with like Jung's way of orienting all these different traits, like the thinking, introverted thinking and extroverted thinking. I'm having trouble how you placed acting under one of the feeling categories.
Right. I mean, the way in which I'm thinking about it is like when you look at Jung's writing, actually feeling is not the right translation for it. It is valuing. It is all about valuing. So I'm saying that, you know, the emotions, motivating actions. That's why I put it in that part.
Okay.
That's something that many Jungians would disagree with, but that's how I think about this. I think it integrates, you know, actions, and acting is a crucial part of who we are as living beings, and the feeling function is the best one to actually capture it because none of the other ones do. So it's kind of motivated action is the way I'm seeing it, the FI. Paul.
Yeah, I had almost exactly the identical question. So I will just propose, is it an abuse of Jung to almost think of it a different flow where the internal valuing leads to external action? Or is that not a valid way? I mean, I'm having the same question about.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So this is a criticism I'm going to get from everybody who likes Jung and everybody who likes Boyd, because I'm actually taking apart their ideas and putting them back in a different way. So this integration is definitely my integration of it, inspired by these people. Okay, and I'm unapologetic about it because Boyd put it very explicitly. He said, if you stop thinking as a result of reading whatever I say, then burn my books. And I am all for that. So and the reason I have asked you to draw this yourself is that I want you to think of alternate ways of putting it together. And that's what, so, but this is, I've read it very carefully, and feeling is clearly the wrong word from even what he means. Valuing is the word which is the closest to that. And the way I see it is that valuing without action, without impetus to action, is kind of contradictory in terms. And what I'm trying to do here is to capture all of human experience, human being, and valuing and action based on it is a crucial part of who we are. So that's why I have put it where I have put it. Thank you. Great question. Next up is Stephen, Katie, and Dave. Stephen.
So is it accurate that the loop is basically Carl Jung, and then you're superimposing Boyd's OODA loop on top of it?
That's correct. That's correct. I'm using Dave. It's your cat talking. Dave, you're talking in a very funny voice. But hold on for a second. So, but Stephen, absolutely right. I'm using what I found is that Carl Jung's take on what human faculties are the most powerful, but John Boyd's way of seeing what you need to do in order to live is far more powerful.
And
So
does
I'm
it have
trying
to
to
be-
bring both of those things together. I'm trying to add to Boyd detail about the psychological functions that are involved. Mostly, I mean, the thing is that the decision and action there isn't much there. But the biggest observation here is that those 4 functions of Jung are involved in reorientation. And that is what makes reorientation particularly complex. So when you look at John Boyd's diagram of orientation, that is a very complex, it's like a whole pentagon of all kinds of factors. And this is a way of actually capturing those all those factors very simply using Jung's way. Next up is Dave, if you can speak. No, Dave, it's your cat speaking. You're sounding like a mouse. You need to fix your sound. You can type in. I'll read it out to you. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I just had a question of, obviously we're complex beings, but I just thought, like, at birth, you know, obviously we're somewhat of a blank slate. So at which point in life are we able to dissect these aspects of ourselves? And would it just be like whenever we become consciously aware of our behavioral patterns, or at which, I guess, point in life?
Excellent question. So one of the very powerful ideas in evolution is the idea of evo-devo. So that means that development proceeds along the same lines as evolution. So the ability to act comes first, then ability to sense comes next. Intuition requires a fairly large brain in order to put things together. That comes next, and then thinking is kind of at the end, as best as I understand the sequence. They happen at different kind of parts of the brain. And so what will happen is that the child will start by moving without being able to sense that much. Then slowly they are able to actually focus their eyes. They can't even focus their eyes when they're born. And they can actually move around in the womb itself without senses. So senses come next. Intuition is much later. And being able to actually do thinking of kind of deliberation, that requires considerable development of the prefrontal cortex, which will come much later. Dave, let's see if your sound is better.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just an observation. What seems to me, because I was not following you when you're saying about Jung's psychological functions, but we're talking like the psychological types, like the IN and EA and all that other stuff. And those around 8 sections of the ring. So it seems to me that depending on what your type is.
No. Dave, a type is something that is based on these functions. These functions are the fundamental. So I would recommend, reading up on functions. These type is something that comes as a result of these functions. It's a concept that rests on this, but these are the foundations of the thinking about type.
I was just thinking that how you function according to your type would affect how effective you are in the circle.
That's actually a very good point. And I'm going to come to that.
Okay.
Because what happens is that there is a variation of how good you are at each of these things. Because some people are particularly good at taking action, but they may not be as intuitive. They may not be as deliberative. Their ability to plan may not be that good. Or some people may be very good at planning, but they may not be able to kind of see the possibilities as well. Or their memory may be very poor. So it's like there are all kinds of possibilities. And so absolutely, the strength of each of these functions in individuals varies quite a bit. Becky, go ahead. Oh, okay. It was just a comment. All right. Okay. So I want to just run through another, look at it kind of another way of how you can use the circle using another idea. and that is Ray Dalio's idea. We studied, in our meetup, we studied Ray Dalio's book, The Principle. So he has this cycle of achieving things. It's a 5-stage cycle. Have ambitious goals, face problems that you encounter when you have ambitious goals, identify the root causes of it, make a plan, and execute. So that is just, the white circle here is setting ambitious goals. What is your purpose in life? The observe part over here is willingness to actually see the problems, to face the problems in achieving your ambitious goals. Coming to the root causes and figuring out actually what is going on is all about this part, reorientation of saying, okay, what actually is going on, creating a picture of the world. This part, deciding, is same as planning as of Dalio, and execution is the action over here. So that's how kind of Ray Dalio's cycle maps onto this one. Now, Dave had asked a question about this white and black, okay? So let me talk about that. In his paper on destruction and creation, Boyd talks about this process of continuously going from abstract to concretes. Abstract are your conceptions, as a result of orientation. And concretes are the actual concretes that you're seeing on the ground. What you're doing is that if you look at this entire cycle, reorientation, it is part of what John Boyd calls creative induction, because you're starting from observations and you are creatively inducing a new concept. This is the lowest point. Here, the entropy in that cycle is the lowest. Here, the order is the highest. So this is the process of creative induction. And this is the process, acting on it and then seeing what happens, is the process of what he calls destructive deduction. You're applying that idea. You're changing the world and you're observing what is going on. And then you proceed back. So this is kind of within the cycle, this is the point of highest entropy. And here you're, by reorienting, by putting things together, you're decreasing the entropy, increasing the order, and coming up with something that closely matches, an idea that closely matches with your function. Then you try to act on that as best as you can. You're encountering a lot of entropy. You're actually interacting with the world when you are acting, and you're taking in the feedback in order to form a better concept. So that is where the destruction and creation in Boyd's paper comes from. All right, any questions so far? Okay, let me go to the next one here. All right. So this is how it is all put together. Okay, so this is very simple, actually. All I'm doing here is that I'm saying that this is a spiral process, that you're doing it continuously. This is not just one cycle you keep on doing and nothing happens. What you're doing is that you are continuously going towards the center. In Boyd's terms, you are increasing your capacity for independent action. In Jung's term, you're becoming more of the self. Or you can imagine that the circle is growing out. The spiral captures the fact that it's a circular motion, that you have to do all of these things. You have to conceptualize, you have to act, and you have to keep doing this again and again. So in that sense, it is a circular motion. But at the same time, there is a direction to it. You're trying to be more of yourself. You're trying to increase your capacity for independent action. So in that sense, it's a circle plus a direction, which is a spiral. Okay. So that's what the spiral is about. I have put this diagram with radial connections there because the function, your function acts as your lodestar. Whenever you're doing something, if you're thinking something, when you're intuiting something, when you're sensing something, when you're doing something, you're always relating it to that. So also, it also creates this kind of a movement, visually, it creates a round movement. So it is that you're going through this entire cycle. So that's what I'm trying to capture here. Okay, so that's, but that's just, let me see if there is anything else. So it's kind of movement towards the center and that it is spiral. Those are the big points I want to make here. So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. And now I'll take more questions. Folks, any questions? Okay, give me just a second here. I'm just going to make it easier for people to do this. Okay. All right. Joe, can you see the diagram here?
Yes, I can. Yep,
okay. Very good.
Right behind you.
Okay, so now I can point and not have, so you can have the whole screen and use the whole screen. All right, so it's going to be Katie first. Katie, go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah, so I recognize the last, or this graph that you have. I mean, it looks similar to like the Fibonacci sequence, which is, the essence of everything, essentially. So the spiraling outward, would that essentially mean like the further you are outward, the more detached you are from yourself, and then you're trying to basically reel it back in and kind of, I don't know, program yourself. That's okay.
Excellent, excellent, absolutely. Because what happens is that if you don't watch out, if you keep on doing something that you were doing before, you will keep going away from your function, than your purpose. Function requires kind of this relentless focus to kind of bringing it back to what really matters to you, because it's even kind of the best designed things. So there, you can think of it as that there is all this kind of gray outside. There is a pull. Entropy is basically, you can think of it as a pull for your life, which is that ring outward. And what you're doing is that you are pushing it inward. So there is this, fight of all living things, of achieving order in the midst of chaos. Okay. Next up is Madeline. Madeline, go ahead.
Okay, yes. Okay, I'm unmuted. This kind of goes to what Joe had said earlier, asking about the role of the collective unconscious. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, I thought, actually it would be as if the entire gray background of one of the earlier diagrams were the collective unconscious underlying everything. So almost as if we're introducing a third dimension into the whole thing. So that kind of in response to what Katie was saying, if we looked at the that entire circle that Shrikant is showing as something that we're looking at from above, that's actually three-dimensional, that the spiral we could say is progressing upwards towards further integration of the self. And every time it loops around, it gathers in that material from the outside, the incompleteness thing, what the external world is telling us as we kind of move along in the integration. But it would be exactly like Shrikant's model, but three-dimensional.
Right. I prefer two-dimensional because it is easier to think of it. And I do think that, everything outside, see, I've talked about the outside as being entropy. Okay, I think more precisely it is chaos, which is actually, it includes, it's all potential. It's all potential. So both positive and negative potential lies there. So you're trying, you can take in, there is a lot of good stuff which lies outside, which you are absorbing in continuously. So both those, the process is going on. Now, in terms of, let me go back to Stoicism, a dichotomy of control. But if anybody else has any questions, you can go ahead and ask. So on Stoicism, on what is within your control? Okay, so one part of it is that being focused on that center is what is the core thing. The second part is the thinking part. That is in your complete, that's in your complete control. There are, so the thing is that there is, what shall I say? I mean, the fundamental thing that is in your control is keeping your eye on the center, and then relentlessly kind of connecting things to it. That's what I would say. It's not a very good answer, but that's how, let me think about it. Let me see if I can put it better, because kind of sensory things are just going to happen. The SI is going to happen. Intuitions will come to you. So it is kind of focused on the center, the blue part, and the red part is what I'm seeing. Joe, what do you think?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
First,
go ahead.
Yeah, but I was thinking about even how do unknown unknowns and known unknowns and fit into this whole entire process, like and essentially known knowns. I mean, right. Known knowns would fit under all of it as far as I can see, but what would where would they fit in?
Right. Both unknown. All the unknowns are in the gray area here, and the known unknowns are in gray area close to you, where you can actually are interacting with them.
Okay.
Unknown unknowns are things which are further out, which you have not even interacted with.
Okay.
So for example, if something that is close to you, that in gray area, which is closer to you, you have some inkling that it is there. You do not know what it is, but you know that there is something there. Like if it's something out here, you do not even know it is there. So that's how I would think of it. Moses.
Okay, this is just a question that came to my mind, that what if we try to combine a value-based system of Jung with the the materialistic scientific process of what we are seeing, right? We go gather information, and based off that, we try to test those theories or arguments, and you get that loop, the cycle. I mean, what I'm saying, what I find is that the center is what is our values are, if I'm correct. And that's what's one of the main function of Jung, is the feeling or function or the valuing function. So is what the Boyd is trying to do, is it trying to make sense or trying to find pattern or find order from the entropy and create something new so that it suits our values?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that Boyd is actually far more aggressive in thinking about values, because he's operating in the military context where you are in the middle of battle and it's a question of life and death. And so he's focused like a laser beam on that. So in terms of kind of pursuing, in terms of action towards your values, Boyd is amazingly advanced. And he is kind of, the other thing in which he's very advanced is that loop, that you're kind of relentlessly doing it and kind of correcting it. Comparatively, the way in which psychology works is that it moves much more slowly, much less responsive. to it. But I don't want to go into too much. I mean, you can ask it as a question. Go ahead, Moses. What's your question?
Oh, no questions. Just I try to understand. The question was like, are we trying to combine the value-based system of Jung with this relentless, pragmatic, cold-blooded way of figuring out the world?
No, I think I would say that we are combining both our value-based systems. Absolutely. You know, John Boyd is a value-based system. You're trying to live. There is nothing more valuable than that.
But it's more based on survival. I mean, it's more of in
there
the
is a
heat of
philosophical
battle.
difference. No, but what he's saying is that it is a philosophical principle. Both these are philosophies, and they have the same ideas of they're all about values. And so I would disagree with you. I would say that Boyd is as profoundly focused on values as Jung is. It's just that Jung has a much greater vocabulary of describing what is going on inside than Boyd does. And Boyd has a much greater vocabulary of what is going on outside than Jung does. And Boyd is more kind of action oriented than that. But next one, we'll take one more question, and then we'll do quick breakout rooms for 20 minutes. And then you can tell me what you thought. I'll do breakout rooms only for 15 minutes. Karina, I'll take a quick question. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question was related to that. It was to sort of question whether the core is a known or not, because like one's purpose is not always necessarily like consciously known, but so based on what you're just saying, like, are we thinking about it more in terms of like situational?
Sure. So you're asking about, you know, the purpose. I mean, purpose is a huge abstraction. So we'll come to that. Okay. What we'll do is that let's do the breakout rooms for 15 minutes, and then you can discuss all of these things amongst yourselves, and then you can come back and you can both kind of talk about your takeaways and share, ask questions. I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right, so it's time for takeaways. Again, the same rules. You can go ahead. So what I would like to do is I would like to hear what you guys thought. This was quite an experiment, but I want to now hear from you what you guys thought. And then I'll go ahead and respond to everything once everybody has had a chance to say things. All right, so you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in order to give your takeaways. You can also ask questions, but I'll handle all the questions. I'll keep track of all the takeaways and all the questions and deal with all of them at the end. So it's going to be Becky, AM, and Kirby. Becky, what did you think?
I really liked how you talked about bringing the life and the purpose to be closer to each other, to close off that gap. And then one more thing that we haven't really spoke about was also like completing that outer ring circle, because when we look at our own cognitive functions, we have our ego, but then we have our unconscious. And the idea of shadow work is to integrate that, all our weaker functions in. And so we're completing not just inward, but we're also completing around the circle.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. Wonderful. Wonderfully put. Next up is AM, Kirby, and Joe. AM, what did you think?
I see what he was trying to do, but I personally I cannot relate to it. I mean, I understand what was the whole purpose.
Are you familiar with Jung or Boyd?
I'm familiar with Boyd.
Okay.
Mainly, but I just had a hard time.
Sure, it is very tough because I took all of Jung, which was what all of it is based on, for granted. So understand that. Next up is Kirby, followed by Joe. Kirby.
Hi, let me see. I just wanted to also show the pictures.
Oh, nice.
What I've been working on so far.
Wonderful.
And I feel on purpose here, the synchronicity of it. I was pleased in the breakout room to be paired with someone who knows Jersey City. And when I was first dreaming of the internet and how things might be in the future, which is how we are now, all talking like this, to go back and talk to someone from Jersey City, which is when I started to have those dreams back in the 1980s, was very like synchronistic, which is a very Jungian in flavor. So I thank you for that opportunity.
Wonderful. And I love the diagrams. That's the only way to understand things, by drawing things yourself. Wonderful. Next up is Joe, followed by Donna. Joe.
I mean, what actually Becky had just said really just kind of blew my mind, because I kind of brought it all together. The idea, the ego, and the shadow work that needs to go into this, that actually fits into this diagram very, very nicely. As far as I'm trying to put a lot of different concepts together. And another one I was trying to think of is how Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 would actually also fit into this. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is an element of that when you're talking about specifically how your internal and external work. So, and your conscious and unconscious. So I'm still trying to figure out how there are certain other concepts that can fit into this quantitatively. The other is the order versus entropy was a new insight for me. The way you drew that out from top to bottom, that actually also opened up my eyes a little bit. But I have my drawings aren't quite as nice as Kirby's, but I have a lot of work to do on them. But I really appreciate it, because I think that there is some overlap there with goals, being yourself, entropy, and purpose and individuation. Mm-hmm. And those three things on each side is what I'm going to try and draw next. So
wonderful, wonderful. I just want to follow up on what you and Becky said. So what I do is that I actually, you see this, you guys, okay, you can see the diagram, right? So look at the spiral, right? So what I do is that I actually evaluate myself on where I am. So there are 3 rounds of the spiral. So for each of the things, I can evaluate myself saying, okay, how good am I at observation? 1, 2, 3. How, it's like the closest to the center is the first one, is the best, and the furthest away is the worst. So you can say, oh, on action, I'm actually close to the center, but on planning, I'm way out there. So you can, so you basically, I draw like a diagram where, like, for example, for planning, I would be here. Let's say on action, I would be here. Then on observation, I may be here in the middle. And so basically it's a way of kind of keeping track on I like the 1, 2, 3 system. Sometimes I use 1, 2, 3, 4, but I think 1, 2, 3 system is kind of poor, okay, and good kind of a thing. And it's just relative to kind of measure which ones, because one of the ways of looking at it, this we did, Becky, when we went through the Ray Dalio's one as well. Like you say, okay, suppose you are going through these 5-step cycle, which of these cycles is your weakest part? Which of these phases is your weakest part? Because actually making a little bit of improvement on that can produce tremendous results. It also works with, working with other people of saying, I'm actually weak with this. So let me work with somebody who is actually strong with it. And we have enough things in common so that we can work together. So absolutely, that was a very good observation. Next up is Donna, Katie, Maritza, and JJ. Donna.
So, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I really like the approach of the 3 different diagrams. That was awesome. I'm a very visual person. I like how it started very simple. and then, you know, zoomed in more. So the layering was really nice. I liked that. The only thing, it's funny, and I only thought of this the last second as I was looking at the 3 diagrams, is that, and also it could be my design bias coming into play here, but I'm like, I'd like to almost move the orient, design, and observe, kind of like a camera lens, and just move it around so that the observed is not just the sensing part, but it, like, you know, it's looking at the intuition, it's looking at the feeling, so that it kind of revolves around those things. That would be kind of the only thing that I might add to it, because I really like it a lot with the continuous loops. So I don't know if you're following what I'm saying, that last orient, design, and observe, kind of the dial turns so that the observe is not just that one piece, it's changing too.
Yeah, no, so Donna, this is exactly the purpose of doing what I'm doing, you know, of drawing the diagrams and making sure that you guys have paper so you can think and you can adjust things accordingly. And, you know, I always play with these things multiple times and continuously. So like even for the meetup, I think I uploaded like 7 or 8 different diagrams as I was going along, just during that time, like within a day or so. And what you're trying to do is that you're trying to identify all the connections and all the relationships, and you're trying to put it in a way where you bring it all together. And there is going to be individual differences based on not just a design sense, but what we think each of these functions are. So our way of drawing actually captures what we think of each of these things. And that's the beauty of this. So thank you very much, Donna, and I really appreciate your comments. Next up is Katie, Maritza, and JJ. Katie.
Hey, yeah, thank you. I thought this meetup was great. It's my first one to this group, and I thought you were great as well. I could honestly learn a lot from you. I started a meetup a few months ago, and I thought you were really good at getting to the point and moving through and keeping things on schedule. So I applaud you for that. My last question was, so I tried to word this as best as I could because I had trouble framing it anyways, but because everything essentially is interconnected and we're all contributing in some way to, in some way or another to the collective consciousness, do these or Jung and Boyd's philosophies take into account how our individual consciousness is affecting not only our realities, but realities of others around us?
Absolutely. And this is where I would use the third dimension that, that Madeline was talking about. If I have to use a third dimension, imagine like you look at this diagram, right? And you picture yourself here. Look at another person who is who has a separate diagram on a separate sheet over here. And so what you can do is that you can actually see what the interaction is. So you can say that, oh, this person is a very intuitive person, whereas I'm kind of a matter of fact person, or this person gets very excited and he's doing something, but doesn't put enough into planning. And you can kind of do the comparison between you and another person. You can do the same thing by putting them, you know, these diagrams, 2 of them together and seeing the relationship between on a flat surface. But absolutely. And you can look at it also in terms of you and a culture, or you and the company that you're operating in, or you or your family. And you can see what the commonalities are, what the conflicts are. So this is actually a picture of an individual, really, but you can very easily extend it into kind of the interaction. And for much simpler versions of this, I have already done that. There are some videos I have up on kind of figuring out the interaction. But absolutely, I think it's very useful and necessary to actually do that. But this forms kind of a base, and then you can do kind of multiple things together. But thank you very much, and welcome to the meetup. We do this every day, believe it or not. Okay. Next up.
Well,
yeah. And because I do this a lot, it's easier for me to do it. You know, I get used to doing this. And the thing is that I want to get so much done that I want each minute to count. So I'm very particular about making sure that every minute that they spent here is well worth it. Next up is Maritza. Maritza, go ahead. What do you think?
I've seen this before. No, I have to unfortunately admit to you that in my mind, I'm changing your diagram.
Wait, Maritza, that's actually the purpose of it. That's why I asked you to get a paper just for that. So
yeah, that's my one complaint. You know what you failed to ask me to grab, and I'm just heartbroken about this?
What?
A protractor. We're all not natural artists. We cannot all draw fantastic circles. I needed my protractor, and it's like 2 flights downstairs, but I didn't want to miss anything. So I just drew freeform, and I'm not showing it. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
But, I was trying to think, so I love the concept of the goal of us in the middle, our purpose, our goals, and, the moving away and moving towards it. But I did mention this in the chat that to me, I was viewing it kind of as, if you take a figure 8 and put it on the side, but not a flat figure 8, maybe like a ribbon. Mm-hmm. And it's a flat surface and you're walking. Maybe you're a little car and you're going along the little circle, right? Up and down. Mm-hmm. And there's an internal and external. Mm-hmm. But if it's a paper ribbon and you fall through it, what happens then, right? And I was like, that's the chaos. And so if we look at your diagram and we think that the order and the chaos, because they're white and black, like at first I was wanting to give them more significance because they're kind of like in your diagram, they like just jump out at you. But really, that's not the point, is it? The point is working towards getting to either one and making sure you don't get stuck in either one. So I feel like if I stop on either one of those in your diagram, it's the equivalent of falling through a paper ribbon if I'm going along it.
Let me do one thing. Let me respond to this and then you can continue. It's a great point. So the question is, why do I have this, the black thing here and the white thing over there? So firstly, it's not order and chaos. Or like if you want to talk about order and chaos, the center is the order and the gray part is the chaos. And
myself is the order?
I mean, it's your purpose. It's your function.
Okay.
That's the most ordered thing that you're trying to do. You're trying to live. Now, so the question is, why do I emphasize this black and white? This is actually a cycle of thinking. And this is relative to the cycle of thinking. So this is like you're going round and round and round and round. Okay. But what I'm saying is that round itself has a structure to it. And I'm bringing the attention to the fact that even during this time, you kind of put something together. And when you put something together, you are kind of at the highest energy level, if you will, highest order level. You have just formulated a new integration. Like I have just drawn this diagram, right? And then I go and start talking about it to all bunch of people like I'm doing, okay? So I've decided to act and I'm acting now. I'm taking all the feedback in from you guys. At the end of it, I am going to have a lot more chaos. And I'm going to take that in again to update the thing. So this is actually focusing on, this is about focusing on the OODA loop of saying this cycle of beginning over and over again. And if you get that right, where you're trying to make maximal progress, even in this one cycle, this whole cycle, Marisa, could be very short. It could be like a minute or less, or a few seconds. Now, having said all of that, at the level of life, this seems to be too much emphasis to put black and white. And again, I think this is actually a right thing to talk about, okay? Of saying, is this emphasis right? Or like, I have, for example, that radial pattern, I had to try with so many different colors, so many different things to say, okay, it has to be at the background so that it doesn't overwhelm everything, but at the same time, it has to be noticeable so that it kind of creates this circular motion effect. So all of that. So I do think, having said all of that, I do think that this is a little too emphatic, but I wanted to keep it emphatic, at least for this presentation, because I wanted to say, look, by putting Boyd's way of being very practical and being able to do things, I'll say, what can I do? It really turbocharges all those functions. Otherwise, you are looking at the functions very passively. This is saying, look at it actively. Let's see what you can do in 5 minutes. So that's why I have emphasized it. I'm not sure I'll keep the emphasis as I go on, but okay, go ahead, Marisa.
A couple other people have mentioned, you know, just the concern of conscious versus unconscious. And shockingly for me, I didn't find any trouble with that, because to me, I think that the beauty of interposing Jung's functions handles that. It takes care of it for me. But I'm wondering if it would help others to view it as two identical circles. Well, maybe, I don't know if they would be exactly identical, but similar circles handling, you know, one handling consciousness, one handling unconsciousness. I'm not entirely certain about that, but that's another question that just, like, I was okay with the integration, because in my mind, I think it covers both, but I was just wondering if there was another way to tweak it to address that in a way that's more clear for others, because I'm hearing a lot of people struggling with that.
Sure, I'll think about that. That's great. Thanks, Marisa. Next up is going to be a last track here. Give me a second. It's going to be JJ, Madeline, Paul, Jeff, and Karina. JJ, what did you think?
Yeah, hi, Shrikant. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, there's so much to really cover. So this process, yeah, I find it interesting. It's something that, it's a loop, right? So it goes back and forth, back and forth. But what I take away basically from listening and the interaction with fellow participants, I started thinking about duality, you know, creation, destruction, but also in terms of expansion and contraction. Like the universe is expanding, but it's also contracting. So these are two forces that I'm focusing on right now. I'm exploring in relation to this loop and Jung's thought. So so in a business, if you want to survive, you want to grow, right? So this is something that I'm going to be working on and integrating it into this whole diagram of observation towards action, and which is kind of like a form of discernment, how we discern things. And also another idea is that the virtues of like prudence and you know, patience, wisdom, all those things are needed in order for our strategies to work. You know, so that's just my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean,
Appreciate it.
that's great. I mean, one of the things I'm doing, one of the things I'm realizing is that with Carl Jung, there isn't enough focus on morality. And so that's one of the things that I found, and that's one of the directions in which I'm kind of expanding, of saying, okay, what is morality? Like, you're talking about, you know, wisdom, and you're talking about justice, you're talking about all of those things are important. And how do you map those, and where do they fit in? So that's definitely one thing, that a direction in which I'm going. Next up is Madeline, Paul, Jeff, and Karina. Madeline.
Yes, hi. I feel incredibly fortunate to be here this evening. Thank you, Shrikant, and everyone in my breakout room. I wanted to comment because Shrikant, perhaps inadvertently, introduced yet another visual image. It's called a spider chart or a radar chart. And when he was talking about looking at where each of his 8 functions is at in relation to the center, this type of diagram, a spider chart or a radar chart, is the name for what that looks like when you draw it out. So I just wanted to give that vocabulary to the group for what he was saying, even though we don't have an illustration of it handy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madeline. And what we did is that when we actually studied Ray Dalio's functions, we actually did spider charts ourselves. We evaluated ourselves on the spider chart, and at least 4 or 5 of our friends, we evaluated each other and talked about it. To say, you know, you think you're good at this? How good do you think? In scale of 1 to 4, and we had a conversation, and it was really, really amazing conversation. So I definitely recommend these things of actual measurement, you know, trying to estimate where you are on these. Next up is Paul, Jeff, and Karina. Paul.
Yeah, Shrikant. You know, I've attended a number, I'm not a total regular, but a number of your meetups. And I think this is the best of all of them. So I want to congratulate you on your plan, your new plan, because engaging everyone this way, but and it's not even about the content. So at a very specific level, you're integrating Jung and Boyd, but there's this abstraction that I took all kinds of different directions, which I think was your intention to get us thinking. So for instance, the outer circle is the consciousness flow, and however you want to describe it, and the inner circle is the self. Just that abstraction is gigantic. I mean, so you can make, for instance, cognitive behavioral therapy, thoughts, feelings, actions, the outer circle.
Yes.
The 4 lobes of the brain, the outer circle. Parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system. And what it helps people understand is that's not the self. Just even that concept is huge. So you made us all very potentially go into a lot of new directions, and science only says like the what, how things work, the outer circle, but it doesn't say why you should do it. You've defined that. So I congratulate you.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Next up is Jeff, followed by Karina. Jeff.
So, Shrikant, this was very thought-provoking. And I just want to center on one thing. And that is your emphasis there on observing. And, you know, the orientation, the ideal self, the definiteness of purpose, deciding and planning, and, you know, leading to acting. I'm very struck lately about what we notice and what we learn from what happens when we act or don't act, but I mean, especially when we act, and the benefits and the importance of learning the best things from whatever we notice as a result of our actions. And it struck me that observing is really the locus of that curiosity and noticing and asking questions and learning. that can lead to a redefinition of one's orientation, as well as planning for how to act experimentally and try other things out. And it really brought it home when you brought it back there, just with a comment about the relationship between form and function, that forms change, not just because, let's say, the form gets old, and it's, you learn things about it, and and maybe it's not quite appropriate. Form changes for all kinds of reasons, whether it's externally or whether internally you change. All of a sudden, form or function is both, form can both degrade and function can change. And you notice both those things through the curiosity that leads to observing. And that's just sort of a reflection on that. Wonderful. Even feedback is observing, as well as things that occur to you yourself. And so that made me think a lot about that, about the significance of observation.
Absolutely. I mean, the other part of it is that that's where courage comes in, like where you actually have to look at what is going on, and you have to be prepared to say that, oh, something is wrong. I did something wrong, or whatever I expected, that didn't happen. And that is huge. Next up is Karina. Karina, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to say, like, I think you do have to have that courage, but like allowing your observation a mode of expression, it helps. I think it's like incredibly powerful for holding people accountable to themselves and to each other, especially in the way you're talking about using it interactively. And yeah, and it sort of like enables change to manifest itself into the world. I'm a terrible drawer, and even with the protractor, and I felt like it made a huge difference for me in terms of like conceptualizing these topics, and like I'm getting more, but pretty well versed in Jung, but like not so much in Boyd, and like being able to actually do something, like just the smallest thing, it makes a huge difference. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope we do some future meetups that also allow us to practice using this tool.
Wonderful, thank you, really appreciate that. And I think I don't see any other way of kind of learning other than doing, where you, this is a point actually from a person I'm really, who's a very profound person, and that is Julian Jaynes. And he talks about the value of externalizing. Okay, so when you externalize something, when you put this diagram, right, or you have all these kind of conceptions of what the relationships between various things are, but when you actually draw them out and you look at it and you say, oh, that's not quite right, the proportion is wrong, and you keep on modifying it, you are actually, it's a way of actually thinking. It's a way of being self-conscious about your thinking. It is about thinking about thinking. Mm-hmm. And when you do that with people, where, what I'm doing is I'm saying, look, this is what I think. And I'm hearing closely to what everybody is saying. Everybody has ideas. I wanted everybody to draw, because in the process of that, you will start noticing things. It's not about just taking in what I'm saying. That's not useful at all. What is useful is that if you put it in your own way and modify it so that it actually captures how you're thinking. If there is a discrepancy between your diagram or somebody else's diagram, you can say, what is true? And it allows you to kind of rise above both the diagrams and evaluate that. But you can do that only if you take the pen in the hand and start writing and start speaking about it. And one of the things that I really like, I know you're new to this meetup, but one of the things I really like about this meetup is that we have a culture of doing that. We value people who are thoughtful and who express themselves and hear other people and go back and forth on very deep topics, which normally people don't talk about. For most people, you know, this entire circle, all the aspects are kind of rigid. And if they are rigid, then they are actually not going towards the center, and they are kind of fragile. You know, they are not very responsive to the great potential. All this great thing outside is not just negative. It has potential, both positive and negative. So being responsive to that is huge. So yeah, so this was wonderful. And thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate all the feedback. And I'm glad that it went off as well as it did. Thank you. And and we have got amazing meetups coming up every day. So check it out. All right. See you, folks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Shrikant.
Thanks, Shrikant.
Bye.
Shrikant.